Welcome to the Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Every 2 weeks, Steve and Clem bring you brief investment insights you may not find anywhere else. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Here are Steve and Clem.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. We are talking today about the entire situation in the Middle East. We're going to focus on the geopolitics of it, the domestic politics of it, the economic implications, investment implications of recent developments in the Middle East. Fortunately, I should say unfortunately, we can't really get this issue out of the news. It's kind of pushed some of the other geopolitical issues to the sidelines, which, is kind of problematic because there's so many of these issues. So, I have some views on it. Steve, I'm sure you have some views on this. So let me ask you, Steve, where do you think this is going in terms of a possible ceasefire?
I was really hopeful, Clem. I thought that the protests that we've seen in the last few weeks have given us a feeling that the people of Israel realize this situation has gone too far. And I think that the hostages at this point, I question how many of them can be alive through all the bombings, through all the locations in these underground tunnels. I don't even know what the number left is estimated at, but I would say that number is probably too high. And I think that when I look at some of the, efforts with Netanyahu in Russia and Netanyahu's trying to justify his positions here, when all along I've found this to be a bit of a confusing rhetoric when he was, he's in charge, he's responsible for the event occurring because of the, ignoring data that they had from various sources that something was going on. And now he's, in my mind, extending this longer than it should be extended. I think that they've made their moves and they've done their damage to the network of Hamas. And now I think that we could be going a little step too far. And I think that I've all along wondered what his true motivation is and whether he's motivated just to maintain his power and not necessarily motivated to do what's best for Israel. So I feel that they should be moving quicker to a ceasefire. And I still don't understand, and this is maybe just my, international naivete, but I don't understand when he says he needs to eliminate the organization of the people. For an Israeli leader to say that they want to eliminate another group of people is just, in my mind, shocking given the history of what happened in World War II. So I understand we want to eliminate people who want to try to kill us, but I'm not sure you can disarm, you can try to put in more safety, you can try to do things, but I'm not sure elimination of a people is really something that we should be talking about in 2024. So in my mind, this has gone on way too long. And now we're seeing that it transfer over to Hezbollah, and how Hezbollah is a force that needs to be reckoned with and is something that needs to be addressed. And if Israel keeps looking around at every possible group who is going to be opposed to them, I think this is going to this is going to go on much longer and have much more damage to the rest of the world, then people, this is no longer an isolated issue with Hamas attack in October. This is now becoming a much wider and wider conflict. And as it becomes a wider conflict, we start to forget that there's still peace is an option. And so I'm hopeful that these protests that are going on in Israel are going to lead to some people in Israel saying, we need to get this done. And I hope that's where we're going with this. But I look at what and how easily things are getting inflamed along the border with Hezbollah. And I think that this is, Iran is not going to stop supporting these groups. And therefore, I'd say that we need to have a real serious conversation about what we can do to make this become more potential for peace in the Middle East.
So, Steve, I don't think you'd be surprised to learn, maybe you would be, that while I agree with you on some things, I disagree with you on other things about this. So let me just...
I would be skeptical if you didn't.
Let me just take you back, take us all back to several years ago, prior to October 7th. So, you had a circumstance where Netanyahu, he's in power as prime minister. His power base includes, the very conservative right, including some folks call them extremists who would rather kick Palestinians out of the West Bank. Certainly move them out of areas that are desired by some of the settler groups. So his power depends on that. He's trying to stay in power because if he doesn't stay in power, he could get prosecuted. So he's concerned.
Funny how power works like that.
He's concerned about his political future, and then you have a very weak left and center in Israel who really can't, do anything about that, even though there's more of an emphasis there on having accommodation with the Palestinians. So what's interesting is that for several years, you had a circumstance where Netanyahu was trying to be too clever than he should be. And so he allowed Qatar to provide aid to Hamas with the idea that he would be able to keep the Palestinians divided between Fatah in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. So he actually allowed aid in. I don't know how many people realize that Netanyahu was responsible for some aid going into Hamas. One has to believe that a lot of that money was used by Hamas to build tunnel systems, right? Wasn't used to support the people. So, one area where I think, I want to really emphasize here is that Netanyahu does not represent, he's the prime minister of Israel, but he does not represent the views of Israelis. And I would at the same time say that Hamas doesn't represent the views of Palestinians. Hamas is they have a governing power. They're a terrorist group that unfortunately has achieved governing power in the Gaza Strip. So, you've got these two diametrically opposed powers that really do not represent the majority of the people in both of those areas, who on a person-to-person level get along just fine, right? There's a lot of there have been a lot of personal to personal interactions between Israelis and Palestinians who have gotten along just fine. And so there's sort of a human basis for thinking that there could be peace, but the people who are in charge, don't look at it that way. So you had October 7 come around, and you had this you let's talk about what it is. It was an invasion by Hamas of southern Israel, and it was shocking to the Israelis. Obviously, I think it may also have been shocking a little bit to the Hamas leadership, because I don't think they really expected it I don't think they expected the Israelis to have their guards down. And I do think it's fair to say that Netanyahu wasn't prepared for this. He had some of his military resources actually in the West Bank, and not along the borders with Hamas, with Gaza. So then, of course, the Israeli people, as you can imagine, just like the U.S. after 9/11, was very united in supporting their government. So in the case of Israel, it was united in support of what Netanyahu and the military wanted to do. And so knowing that Gaza had this tunnel system that Hamas had built, and that Hamas would have access to it, not the people of Gaza. This isn't Ukraine, where the tunnels are open to the Ukrainian people. This was Gaza, where the tunnels were basically a system for allowing Hamas to hide. So Israel went after Hamas. Unfortunately, they killed a lot of Palestinians in doing so. Now, an argument has been made by the Israelis that, well, they use pinpoint techniques and warn Palestinians to get out of the way. And so, as when you look at the numbers, some people say, well, 40,000 dead, is a lot, and I would agree with that. Others might say, others in Israel, certainly Netanyahu would say, well, 40,000, that doesn't come even close to allegations of large scale death, because it's not like millions of people. There are 2 million in Gaza, so what is 40,000, right? Would be the counter argument for that. But still, 40,000 is a lot. And some people would say, well, some of that is Hamas. Well, yeah, some of it is Hamas, but a lot of it is not Hamas, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, I don't think we're disagreeing that much here, Clem.
yeah,
You
so you
haven't
had
said
this,
anything that I
you had this,
disagree with. I mean,
yeah. So you have all this death and destruction that has been wrought by the Israelis in response to what Hamas did, and the U.S. has continued to provide weaponry. The only times when they've sort of that the U.S. has hemmed and hawed about weaponry was in providing those giant bombs that kill more people than they kill the enemy. And so there's been some hemming and hawing about that, about the supply of those kinds of bombs. But in large part, the U.S. And other countries have provided weaponry on a continuing basis to Israel because of the threat of Hamas, and not just Hamas, but as you pointed out, Hezbollah on the northern side too, and just a general recognition that that what's going on with Hamas, what's going on with Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, are all part of a proxy war that's being waged by Iran, right?
right.
So several more things, Steve, and then I'll come back to you. So first of all, you've pointed out that Netanyahu makes the statement that we need to destroy Hamas. There's something that statement really misses. And yeah, he could kill a lot of Hamas. He could reduce Hamas down to just very small numbers. But the idea of Hamas is ideological, and you can't kill an ideology. And the Hamas ideology stems back to the Muslim Brotherhood, which had a stint in Egypt. Has a sort of an ideological ancestor with the current regime in Turkey. This is an ideology. And so what will happen is that you have the sons and daughters and brothers and sisters of people who have been killed in Gaza who are tomorrow's terrorists. So you really have to wonder, to the extent that Netanyahu is killing Hamas, and especially killing civilians in Gaza. How many future terrorists is Netanyahu actually creating?
Right.
I think Israel has to worry about that. That Netanyahu isn't thinking beyond the current conflict and his current tenure in office, but and is running the risk of creating, another century of conflict by killing all these people. So I think that's a very should be a very big concern. The last thing I would say, Steve, and I know I've been dominating this. Last thing I would say is that it's not solely a question of Israel versus everybody else in the Middle East. The Middle East is complicated, and you actually have a confluence of interests between Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf states, and Israel against Iran and its proxies, the Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and some groups in Iraq and Syria. And this is a regional conflict where your enemy's enemy is your friend and all that kind of stuff, right? You saw that with the Iranian attempt to send missiles over to Israel. A lot of them were shot down by, of all people, the Saudis and the Gulf states and Jordan, and so it shows that the situation is much more complicated. And I think Netanyahu feels he's got some freedom of movement here because of what the other countries are doing in terms of not supporting, or I should say, not doing, in terms of how they're viewing the Palestinian question. It's not like they're providing a lot of support to Hamas. It's the Iranians. It's not, the Saudis aren't sending in military support. The Egyptians aren't sending in military support. The Egyptians have created this huge barrier so that the Palestinians can't cross into the Sinai Desert. So, it's not a situation where it's Israel versus the rest of the world. It's really Israel versus the proxies of Iran. It really is an Israel plus Saudi plus some other countries versus Iran and its proxies war. And the sooner that conflict can be resolved one way or another, the sooner that you can have some, I think, some negotiating progress overall towards creating regional peace.
We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying our episodes. If you are, then we'd greatly appreciate your liking, following, and sharing. Help us help others. Now let's get back to the discussion.
Right. Well, first of all, I don't think it's a regional conflict, because I think when you get China involved, and China is concerned about their flow of oil, and we've got Russia involved, because guess what? If the Middle East source of energy were to get disrupted, who's one of the bigger providers of energy that might benefit from a higher price on the black market for their oil? I think that Russia is engaged here. I think that the United States, was the reason I bring up this idea of Israel and getting to a peace, is that when I see us move another carrier group towards the Middle East and take it away from Asia, to me, that says we've got a problem here, Houston, and there's something that we need to do soon, because if these carrier groups are going to defend Israel and become located there more permanently, I think the situation is, has a Vietnam-like presence. And I don't think we can really justify to people putting our troops in the middle of this when this situation has, in my mind, a lot of politics around it with Netanyahu. It has a lot of history around it with some of these, as you say, we're creating terrorists of the future with this when we kill innocent people. I look at companies and I look at countries in many ways similar. You have goodwill. Goodwill is an asset for a company, for a country. And what you do when you eliminate or hurt or kill others in that, trying to eliminate your enemy, your goodwill gets burned up. And so to me, Israel is burning up its goodwill at a rate that is, it's going to be very hard to recover that goodwill. So when you see something happening and you say, oh, well, they're doing this, it's against what most people would say is normal reaction. I think that, yes, I think they had the right to react. I think they had the right to act against Hamas, and I think they did act. The question is, do you act forever against Hamas, or is it is there some point at which you say, my use and destruction of this culture, this group, I agree, all Palestinians are not bad. All Palestinians are not. When I say Israel has to act against Hamas, yes, I understand that. But they also have to act in a way to treat the people who are non-combatants just like they would if they were fighting, a conventional war. And these people are non-combatants. They shouldn't be in the range or feeling the wrath of Israel when they didn't come over the border and attack Israel. I mean, out of the 1.5 million Palestinians, how many are Hamas? What do we think that percentage is?
2+ million people in Gaza, and then another 3.5, I think, in the West Bank. So there's almost, and then when you add in Israeli Arab citizens who are also Palestinian, you actually have as many Palestinians under Israeli control and within Israel proper than you do Jewish Israelis. So it's a more finely balanced situation than I think many people realize. If that entire area came under Israeli control, including West Bank and Gaza, it would be a finely balanced situation on the religious and ethnic front.
Right, but the Palestinians versus Israel it would be similar, but Hamas as a percent of the Palestinian.
Well, Hamas is a terrorist group, and it shouldn't have control. It ideally needs to be rooted out. There's no question about that. It really should not form a part of any government.
Right. My point is it 50, 60, 70% of Palestinians are Hamas?
Oh, I would
Or is
say
it 10?
Much less than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's my point.
Yeah.
If you've got 9 innocents for every person of evil, then you can't really effectively eliminate this group because you can't differentiate.
So let's
First of all, that's what the definition of terrorist is. He does things without a uniform or without a
let's take an analogy. Let's take an analogy of Nazi Germany, right? So what was the percentage of Germans who were, not culpable? I would say including not culpable would include all those in the German army who were drafted as opposed to volunteered. I would say it's probably the same percentages, right? Non-culpable to culpable. And yet, the U.S. And others bombed the heck out of Nazi Germany in order to remove that government. So that was perfectly justified. If you look at
People wore uniforms, and that's the difference, I think, between if you represent yourself as part of the army of Germany versus if you represent yourself as part of the Hamas army and you're identifiable by soldiers in the field, that's a terrorist is saying, I'll mix in with the population and you won't know.
I'm not distinguishing. I would say that the Nazis and those who volunteered for their army were terrorists. Okay, they were terrorists. I think that you have a similar situation. One interesting analogy would be Vietnam, where the vast majority of the people of North Vietnam and South Vietnam, were not culpable at all. You had a small group of, you can call them today you call them insurgents simply because they won, right? But they were viewed as terrorists at the time, and they were a small minority, and yet the U.S. bombed the heck out of Vietnam. And so I think
technology has changed, hasn't it, Clem? We've become much more capable of isolating damage, whereas
correct
in the 60s and 70s, the
napalm
and bombing was quite a bit different. So
I
don't want to get too far down this path of comparison, but
right.
All I'm saying is it feels to me like the situation is growing, not mitigating. It feels to me like the situation is becoming less clear versus clear. And all I'm saying is I think that the expansion and the movement of carrier groups is now putting at risk other areas because as we move our carrier group out of Asia, is there anybody in Asia who might be interested in that carrier group being moved who has an offshore entity that it would like to control again? And we know that China and Taiwan are still there, but we've decided to make the priority Israel and Hezbollah.
Right. And not just Taiwan.
Does everybody get onto that? Is everybody behind that? And why as a country are we talking about, taxing tips instead of, carrier groups moving to help Israel?
So it's not just the Taiwan issue with respect to China. China has been doing a lot in recent weeks in the South China Sea.
Correct, with
clashes
the
with
Japan
and the Philippines, and so I think that's an issue. I think China is the one area of cooperation and unanimity between Republicans and Democrats in this election, and so I think China doesn't show up as much in this election. I think Russia does. There's different views on Russia. I don't really even think there's that many different views on Israel and the Palestinians. The propaganda from both sides would suggest that, but I don't think there's that much of a difference. I think both sides support Israel, and don't want to see more Palestinians killed. Both sides want that. But China, is a position of unanimity, and you're right. You're absolutely right that the U.S. strategic position in the Pacific, in the Asia Pacific, is weaker because of our greater focus on the Middle East and the fact that we're, putting ourselves in a position of having to defend not just Israel, but Gulf Arab states against whatever Iran might do.
Right. When we look at things, Clem, I'd love to believe that the media and the issues of magnitude that are discussed on the evening news are somewhat related to our own interests. And when I see these pieces on, tax-free Social Security, and I see tips, and I see these things that I look at as issues, but with a small eye. And then I look at some of these other things and I sit there and I say, I think this is information that we should understand as a country so that we could say, yes, that makes sense. And yes, I'm behind that. And yes, this area needs more attention. But when we look at the magnitude of the spending on weapons in Ukraine and Israel, I have to somehow go back to, is this the best we can do? Is this the best country we can be? And if it is, then fine. But I don't feel like there's been a real discussion as to whether some of these things shouldn't be and could be resolved but by a more forceful government who would say to Netanyahu, all right, this has gone on long enough. And I think that we need to somehow get a priority list and start to focus on those things, because I don't know how we expect politicians to cover and maintain the country we want to have when in reality they're focusing on things that only affect a small percentage of the country.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you here, Steve, on this one, right? So, the foreign people who are focused on foreign policy and on foreign military engagement, I think are a relatively small portion of the U.S. population, right? I think that, we might be, because we sort of live in this, I'll be the first one to say I live in a bubble, right? Foreign policy type of bubble. I live in the Baltimore, Washington area, and
Yep.
a lot of people here who focus a lot on this, right? But if you move into the middle of this country, the so-called blue wall states, the Great Lakes, and you move into places like some parts of the South, you can speak even more eloquently than I can about Georgia and North Carolina and so on. People don't really care, okay, about foreign policy. They care about what's important in their lives in terms of putting some extra dollars in their pocket. That's what they care about. And that's what folks in this election, the candidates, are focusing on. You've got, both Trump and Harris are focusing on aspects of this issue. Trump more on the inflation thing, and Harris, more on higher wages through unions. Yeah, they're both focused. I mean, they're approaching it different ways, but they're both focusing on issues that are important to American voters. And this other stuff, foreign policy issues, is kind of tangential. I'd be very surprised if any of this, or a lot of this, beyond like maybe one question or two questions, comes up in the debate.
I understand why people talk about pocketbook issues, and I understand why they want to appeal to whatever that state and that area has. All I'm trying to say is that as individuals, we should always be trying to broaden our understanding and perspective.
Yes.
And if we expect somehow people are going to broaden their views of things without the major media talking about it, I think that's a non-starter. We are in a great part dependent upon a media to deliver and explain ideas that are not always easy. And I'm unrealistic and idealistic to expect something different. But I don't think I'll stop bringing it up, because guess what? If we don't bring it up, Clem, who is? If we don't talk about it and it ends up affecting people's portfolios and people's lives, will we feel better that we kept it to pocketbook issues? I don't think we will.
Yeah, and that's why we're discussing.
I'm not going to apologize for
Yeah.
bringing up the movement
Right.
of carrier groups.
And you know what?
Because I know there's people who have children that are on those boats.
Absolutely.
Who are concerned about them moving into the Middle East and out of Asia. And
this is why
people who have thousands and thousands of employees of the armed forces who are putting themselves at danger. And I look at that and say, are we understanding the reason we're putting ourselves in danger? And yes, it's an ancillary issue. I understand. I am off one edge of the deep end here. I realize that. It's not conventional, but I'm skeptical of what we're doing and what we're talking about and saying, maybe we should be talking about something else. And I could be completely wrong. This might all get resolved and a peace treaty is signed by the end of the week. And this episode goes into the netherworld and never has impact anyone again. But there is a possibility that they don't sign the peace treaty and this does become a wider conflagration. And therefore, we have something and someone says, how did this get to there? Why did it get to here? What could we have done differently? And then we said, well, if we never talk about it, is it likely that it will ever get to be something different?
And our job on this, just to bring this closer to a conclusion, our job as podcasters in this area of investments really have to be focused on broader issues. We can't just talk about valuations and AI and so on. We do have to talk about, geopolitical considerations.
I agree.
Steve, do you have anything else you want to add to this?
No, I think we've beaten this horse. I'm sorry to say we went a little long, people, but I appreciate all the listeners and ask that you please try to share and like and let others know about Skeptics Guide, because we're really happy to be here and trying to help you with your portfolios and trying to help you with your general knowledge. And thanks again for listening.
Thank you, Steve.
The views shared on this podcast represent the personal investment views of the hosts. They are for educational purposes and not meant to be taken as investment advice. Listeners should consult their own investment, legal, and tax advisors. Past performance of any investments is not a guarantee for future return.